Good morning and welcome to the wilderness. This is Holy Week, and so I wanted to come and do these devotionals here as we met in the shadow of the cross. Let's go do our daily practice and pray. Father, help us to hear from you. Oh, Abba, Father, help us to hear your voice in the midst of quarantine and quiet and times where we're separated. God, help us to hear what it is you have to say through your Son, Jesus. In the name of Jesus, amen. Today is Passover night. Many Jews tonight will get together or probably gather separately to celebrate the Seder meal. The Seder meal is a sacred meal to the Jewish people, but it's something that as a church and as a Christian people that we ought to pay attention to. See, it's the meal of flight or the meal of haste, of running away quickly. This meal is very significant to these people because it symbolized a promise. Now, what happened was, if you remember back to the Exodus story, God's people were running away from the oppressor. Now, if you remember back to the Exodus story, God's people were running away from their oppressor, which was the Egyptian government. This government was oppressing them, making them to be slaves, and God did this whole series of curses and plagues and things like that. And finally, Pharaoh agreed to let God's people go. Now, before they left, God made him eat a meal. And what he made him do was slaughter a lamb, and he would either have them share it with their neighbors, or if there was enough people in that household, they would all eat it together. They would bake bread without yeast, and that they would slaughter a lamb, and this would be some of their meal. They'd have some of the bitter herbs and things like this. And they would take the blood of that lamb and they would put it over the doorposts of their homes. And in this way, on that night, in the last plague, the angel of death passed over the place with the blood of the lamb on the doorposts. It was a substitutionary atonement. The idea that that lamb died in place of the sins of Israel's people, of God's people. And so God's people were there. They ate this meal. They put the blood over their doorposts. Almost, this pays dividends in the New Testament, right? Blood over the doorposts. And they left. They fled in haste. They ran away quickly to safety. So all of a sudden, on Passover night, Jesus gets together with his disciples. He gets together and he has this Last Supper with them. It says, on the first day of the festival of the unleavened bread, the disciples came to Jesus and asked, "Where do you want us to make preparations for you to eat Passover?" He replied, "Go to the city to a certain man and tell him, the teacher says, my appointed time is near. I'm going to celebrate the Passover with my disciples at your house." So the disciples did as Jesus directed them and prepared the Passover. When the evening came, Jesus was reclining at the table with the 12, and while they were eating, he said, "Truly, I tell you, one of you will betray me." They were very sad and began to say to him one after the other, "Surely you don't mean me." Jesus replied, "The one who has dipped his hand into the bowl with me will betray me. The Son of Man will go just as it is written about him. But woe to that man who betrays the Son of Man. It would be better for him if he had not been born." Then Judas, the one who would betray him, said, "Surely you don't mean me, Rabbi." Jesus answered, "You have said so." While they were eating, Jesus took the bread, and he had given thanks, and he broke it, and he gave it to the disciples, saying, "Take and eat, this is my body." Now, remember, for generations, they had been taking this meal and eating that bread with the understanding that this is the meal and this is the bread that they would cook and bake to run away from an oppressive empire. This is the food that they would have in order to take with them and run away and be free. It's freedom food is what this is. And now Jesus puts an entirely new spin on it, and he says, "Take and eat this bread. This is my body." And he hands it out to them. Then he took the cup. When he had given thanks, he gave it to them, saying, "Drink from it, all of you. This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. I tell you, I will not drink of this fruit of the vine from now until the day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom." When they had sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. Now, keep in mind, for generations, they had been taking this blood and they'd been putting it over their doorpost. They had been reminded that this blood of this lamb was significant because it saved them. And now all of a sudden, Jesus is utterly reframing this meal. And I still don't think they fully got what this meant until Easter Sunday morning. But they see this meal happen with Jesus. And Jesus explains it all to them, saying, you know that freedom meal that you had? The whole idea of you're going out of oppression, that isn't exactly what's going to happen to you when I go to the cross. That you will be led out of oppression. That your oppressor will no longer have power over you, that the sin that is so apparent in you will be absorbed in my very body, and that we're going to have a new agreement in my blood. So on this Passover day, whether you try a Seder dinner or not, be reminded that you are loved by a God who sent his Son to go to the cross for you. That you are loved by a God who sent his Son to absorb our sin, our brokenness, our shame, to absorb it all on the cross. Be reminded that you are loved by that God.